Hey, my name is Will Watson, and this is the Morning Report. Listen, I've been thinking about something lately, and maybe you've noticed it too. Republicans here in Hillsborough County have finally accomplished something that would have seemed unlikely, impossible, not that long ago. After years of effort, organization, campaigning, and door knocking and voter outreach, Republicans now hold a voter registration advantage over Democrats. For conservatives who have spent decades trying to build a stronger political presence in this county, that achievement should be viewed as a major milestone. It represents years of works by activists and candidates and volunteers and donors and just regular folks who believe that Hillsborough County was worth fighting for. Well, at least certain parts of Hillsborough County were worth fighting for. But as significant as that is, I find myself asking a question that I don't hear enough people discuss. What happens when a political movement finally gets what it wants? When you get what you thought you wanted? The answer is not always what people expect. Many organizations spend so much time trying to gain power, they never really prepare themselves for what comes after they obtain it. I'll often liken it to not preparing for success. The mindset required to grow from a minority to a majority is very different from the mindset required to govern as a majority. So when you are the underdog, the focus is always directed outward. Your attention is fixed on the opposition. Your energy is spent pursuing voters, recruiting supporters, and overcoming obstacles placed in front of you by people who disagree with you. Everything revolves around winning. But once you become the larger party, the nature of the challenge, of course, changes. Suddenly, the greatest threat to your future are not always external. Sometimes they come from inside your own house. And I think that that's what Republicans need to understand right now. The political landscape in Hillsborough County has changed, but too many people still are operating with the habits and assumptions of a minority party. They're still fighting yesterday's battles while standing in an entirely new environment. The result is that instead of focusing on how to expand conservative influence and build a durable governing coalition, many Republicans seem increasingly focused on fighting each other. And the more I watch these internal conflicts unfold, the more I find myself asking whether Republicans have developed a habit that could ultimately undermine their own success. Why does it why is it sometimes as though that Republicans are determined to destroy their own rising leaders? We see this all the time. Republicans shoot their wounded and eat their young. Now, before anybody accuses me of pretending that this only happens on one side of that political line, let me be clear. Democrats, y'all engage in your own form of political infighting. These have established figures. They have insurgents. They have factions that compete for influence and power. Human nature doesn't suddenly change because someone registers as a different political party. But I'm a conservative, and because I care about the future of the conservative movement, I believe it's important to examine the weaknesses of our own side. It is just no good. It's a waste of freaking time pointing out the flaws of our opponents if we refuse to acknowledge the problems that may be developing in our own ranks. And one of the realities of politics is that every emerging leader represents more than just himself or herself. A new leader is not simply a new face. A new leader is a symbol of a possible future. When a younger conservative begins gaining support, attracting attention, or building an audience, people aren't merely evaluating that individual, they're evaluating what the individual might mean for the future and direction of the movement. They're asking whether this person represents continuity or if this person represents change. They are asking whether this person strengthens their influence or threatens it. They're asking whether the priorities of tomorrow will look like the priorities of today. That is why reactions to emerging leaders are often much stronger than the circumstances would seem to justify. The problem is that healthy organizations understand that leadership development is not optional, it's essential. Every successful business develops future executives. Every successful church develops future pastors and ministry leaders. Every successful sports franchise develops future starters. Military organizations develop future officers. You understand. You get it. They understand that the future does not arrive by accident. It must be intentionally cultivated. But in politics, we often see a different pattern. Instead of identifying talent and helping it mature, people immediately begin looking for reasons to dismiss it. Instead of asking how a promising young leader can contribute to the movement, they begin searching for ways to disqualify that person before they can even have an opportunity to grow. You know, Sheriff Brown said, kill it before it grows, right? Imagine a football team that viewed every talented rookie as a threat rather than an asset. Imagine the Cleveland Browns. Imagine coaches spending more time criticizing young players than developing them. Imagine the Cleveland Browns. Imagine veteran players treating every newcomer as competition instead of an investment in the future success of the team. Imagine the Cleveland Browns. Such an organization would never sustain excellence. Imagine the Cleveland Browns. Eventually, the veterans would retire, the talent pipeline would dry up, and the franchise would decline, like the Cleveland Browns. Yet something very familiar can happen, or similar can happen, in political organizations when the leaders become more focused on protecting their position than strengthening the movement. And that matters here in Hillsborough because the Republican Party is no longer operating from a position of weakness. The registration numbers indicate that Republicans have achieved something meaningful. However, voter registration alone is not a measure of success. Registration advantages do not govern. They don't solve problems. They don't improve schools or neighborhoods or reduce crime or increase economic opportunity. Those outcomes require leadership. They require competence and a vision that extends beyond simply winning the next election. And that's why I think Republicans must begin thinking differently about what comes next. The first adjustment involves understanding that success creates new responsibilities. For as long as I can remember, Republicans could point to Democrat dominance in many local institutions, like the city of Tampa, as an explanation for why certain goals remained unfulfilled. That argument becomes less persuasive if the voters increasingly place their trust in Republican candidates and Republican ideas. The public's expectations rise alongside the party's success. Voters begin asking, why not, or asking not what you oppose, but what you intend to accomplish. They begin evaluating not your complaints, but your results. The second adjustment involves recognizing that disagreement is not the same thing as disloyalty. President Trump. The second adjustment involves recognizing that disagreement is not the same thing as disloyalty. One of the most damaging trends in modern politics is a tendency to view every difference of opinion as evidence of betrayal. Healthy political movements contain debates. They contain competing ideas. They contain individuals with different strengths, experiences, and perspectives. That diversity of thought can be an asset if it's managed constructively. The goal should not be uniformity. The goal should be unity around core principles while allowing room for honest discussion about strategy, priorities, and implementation. Unfortunately, social media has encouraged the opposite approach. Every disagreement becomes a public spectacle. Remember Trump and Elon? The bromance ends, right? Every policy dispute becomes a loyalty test. Every election becomes an existential struggle between the factions that often agree on far more than they disagree. The result is a culture in which internal conflict consumes energy that could be directed towards persuading new voters and advancing conservative ideas. If Republicans hope to build a lasting majority in Hillsborough County, they cannot afford to waste their momentum fighting battles that serve no productive purpose. Another important reality is that most voters are not political activists. Most people don't spend hours every day monitoring political arguments online. They don't. They got to go to work. They're focused on their families, careers, finances, churches, schools, every sport, anything else. They care about whether their neighborhoods are safe, their children are in good schools. They care about if they can afford their rent and buy food and pay for their ridiculous car insurance. They care about practical outcomes. While politicos and political insiders may become consumed by ideological disputes, ordinary voters are asking a much simpler question: who is making my life better? That question should guide Republicans' behavior moving forward. What question? Who is making my life better? If conservatives want to maintain and expand their gains, they must become known as not merely as critics of bad ideas, but providers of good solutions. They must demonstrate competence in addition to conviction. They must show that conservative principles can produce tangible benefits for regular people. Winning arguments is important, but winning trust is even more important. Part of earning that trust involves cultivating future leaders instead of fearing them. Strong leaders are not threatened by talented people. They welcome them. They mentor them. They challenge them. They help them grow. Weak leaders view every capable newcomer as a political rival. Strong leaders view capable newcomers as evidence that the movement has a future. The difference between those two mindsets often determines whether an organization thrives or declines. Republicans should also resist the temptation to confuse temporary success with permanent dominance. Political history is filled with examples of parties that believed they had secured a lasting advantage, only to discover that the voters are far more independent than party strategists often assume. Coalitions shift, issues change, new generations emerge, public priorities evolve. The registration advantage Republicans enjoy today should inspire confidence, but it should also encourage humility. Nothing in politics is guaranteed. Every election must be earned, every voter must be respected, every success must be defended through continued performance. Now, perhaps the most important shift Republicans need to make is moving from the mindset of an insurgent movement to the mindset of a governing majority. Insurgents focus on identifying problems. Governing majorities focus on solving them. Insurgents thrive on opposition. Governing majorities are judged by outcomes. Insurgents can survive on passion. Governing majorities require competence, discipline, and long-term thinking. The habits that develop a movement gain influence, but not are always the same habits required to sustain that influence. If I could add a football analogy, it's the team that comes back from 28 points late in the fourth quarter, but they can't win, and it goes into overtime, and they lose in overtime because they simply can't maintain that energy because their focus has to change. Now, as I look at the future of Hillsborough County, where I live, excuse me, I see a tremendous opportunity. I see a chance for conservatives to build something durable and meaningful. I really do. I see an opportunity to develop a new generation of leaders who can carry that movement forward long after today's political battles have faded into history. But that opportunity will only be realized if Republicans resist the urge to consume themselves through unnecessary conflict. They must understand that every young, talented conservative does not represent a threat. Every disagreement does not represent betrayal. Every debate does not require a civil freaking war. The future belongs to organizations that know how to grow. It belongs to movements that know how to develop talent. Belong to leaders who understand that success is measured not by how tightly they hold power, but by how effectively they prepare others to lead. If Republicans here in Hillsborough County embrace that mindset, the registration advantage they have achieved may become the foundation for something much larger. If they reject that mindset and spend their time fighting one another, they may discover that political success can disappear as quickly as it arrives. The choice is theirs. They can focus on building or they can focus on battling. They can cultivate leadership or suppress it. They can think about the next generation or they can obsess over the next election cycle. The path they choose will determine whether this movement becomes a turning point or merely a footnote. As far as I'm concerned, I believe conservatives should choose growth. They should choose leadership and competence and confidence. And most importantly, they should choose a future that is bigger than any individual or faction or political dispute. Because at the end of the day, the goal was never simply to outnumber Democrats. The goal was to build a stronger community, a stronger future, a stronger county. The Republicans keep that mission at the center of their efforts, then their best days are still ahead. I'm Willie Lawson, and this is the Morning Report. Thank you for your kind attention. Until we see you again, go out there and learn something, love somebody, and for goodness sakes, y'all take care of yourself. We'll see you when we see you. Bye-bye now.